that, right? So the scandals of the war, the starving children of Vienna, all that, it really, and before that, the children in the concentration camps in the Boer War, that's the same people, the Quakers, this is the same people, you can find them, the anti-slavery and the children, same people. But then how do you do it after the scandal? How do you keep it going? And so they really were trying children's rights, child welfare, inquiries about child welfare, social workers working together. They really were trying to find ways to do this. But when they do that conference on the rights of the child in 1931, there's a huge buzz around it. And then they cannot get money to do anything after. And the only time they can get money is when the war starts in Ethiopia. And then they say, they send somebody in Ethiopia, save the children, and then they say, send us harrowing pictures of children. They need heavy stuff to be able to raise money. And the social worker who goes there, she said, I don't have any, because they won't send me on the front. Anyway, on the front, it's all men. So then she starts sending children of soldiers who are abandoned or need some help, but they don't look, bloody or maimed or even starving. So they have a really hard time raising money. But they raise a little because it's a war and all that. But that's 35, 36. But the minute that the war starts in Spain, the Civil War, all the money goes to Spain. And then people like Sylvia Pankhurst, who was raising money for Ethiopia, despairs of this scandal-led attention to children.
Thank you. A question related to the financing of that. How much is by government donation? How much is public? And how involved are the churches? I know at that time they were a lot more
Okay, so the Child Welfare Committee starts with a grant, like a grant from an American organization who is worried about sexual education. So they're stuck with that. They don't like it because they think it's Puritan American sexual education. But they're stuck with money for sexual education. And they have to do something about this. They get some general secretariat money, right? Which is like the general working. So she's paid by the Secretariat. So that's that. And then for their inquiries, they really run after grants. They get a bit from the Save the Children, they get a bit from charities, they get some kind of grant from American social work, but they really are short of money. And so very often that stuff is done by aristocrats, or people who have family money, who can actually travel and do the stuff and go, like the one person that the League sends to Canada to investigate orphanages is this rich, she's called Leonie Chaptal, she's this rich lady who doesn't need that much money to travel, right? So it's a really difficult thing, and as the depression goes, it's even worse, right? And so not much. But then interesting about children. So UNICEF now, like the successor of that kind of stuff, is, if I'm right, the only, or if not the biggest, organization of the UN who gets money from the general public. Right? It's interesting. It's got a funny beast that still raises money otherwise because of children. They don't get mission money, but they get missionaries on furlough coming to help them on their own salary, right? So they can live around that, or they organize their meetings so that people who are coming for the Mandates Commission and they're on furlough and they come to missionary things in Geneva, so that they don't have to pay too much to organize their commissions and their committees and their inquiries. And when they do their inquiries in Africa, they just send letters to existing missions. But UNICEF started that way. They started with missionaries. They were using missionary money, and not money, but people who were there paid by churches who were helping them. Right? So there's never much money. The Pope raises a lot of money for the Save the Children in 1919. It's the first time that the Pope raised money for a non-denominational NGO, because it's children. And he gives them all that money, and then they create a fund, and that fund, sometimes that NGO helps the League Committee do its stuff. And the International Committee of the Red Cross, the one and only thing that they ever sponsor is the Save the Children. And so they gave Red Cross money to Save the Children, and then Save the Children and the League of Nations are really working together. So that's following the money is very interesting. Yeah, and then one of the things that happens is that when when the league does inquiry about health, say, and they ask for or infant mortality, and they ask for statistics for that, new states like the old Austro-Hungarian Empire and all that, who want to perform like a state, are very eager to pay demographers to send statistics on infant mortality, because they want to be in these lists where you show up as a state, right? So there's a lot of local state money spent into sending these statistics and help these inquiries, because they want to be in the list, right? And it's a cheaper way to be present than to do heavy diplomacy for these new countries. Yep.
I'm really interested in the problem of identifying Andrée Colin.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what else you know about her. Do you know which community she was from?
So,
was she married?
okay, good. I'm getting there. So now I have all the papers that she left when in her office. Okay, so I'm following where she went. I also have somebody who's going to send me, because I went and I saw it, but I couldn't do it. I was in a hurry. All her personnel files. So to be continued, I'm going to know that next year, especially because at the end, she was stuck in a scandal of money. And it doesn't look, as I went really fast through the papers, it looks like she was persecuted, partly because she was a Catholic and she was the middle of these Catholic French things. But partly she might have done the wrong things. But when it gets a bit more legal, there is when you get the stuff. Like the reason why I have a lot of stuff on the Save the Children International Union is because they converted in the International Union of Child Welfare. They were in Geneva. And the head of that organization in the 70s did all sorts of corrupt things. So all the archives are the police archives, and there's tons of stuff because they never destroyed it, right? So when it goes badly, you know a lot. So I will know more later, but I don't remember. I was seeing her picture, and I went in the bulletin of her association. I know where she was working, but I don't know where she was from and where she was hired or something. So I know a lot of where she went, which association she visited, the reports she wrote, but I still don't know who she is in the picture. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, I was wondering how much. So sometimes when organizations work with children, the intent was also to work with the mothers. So to advance the mothers and how to raise children. So how much of that was
How many
going
mothers
on?
do I see? Probably. Mothers education. A lot of the stuff that is clearly purely children, you don't have to bother too much about. Mothers are dependent children, right? So they are in orphanages, in foster care, all that. So they really went for that lot. Mothers, then you get into, there was a women's commission, right? So then you get into the women, health, nutrition, then you get some parents' education, mothers. I don't have a straight answer to that. There's not that much there. Because the women work on the Women's Commission. There are some women around there. No, I don't see many mothers. Actually, they are really for mother care, but they really, so that in the propaganda, it's important that you have a mom and a dad and all that, but the actual action towards mothers, not much. There's something I forgot to say, which is not an answer to your question, which I want to say. One of the things I see there is that, I told you Colin never reached the ceiling like Medici. But in my slides on philanthropy, when they were doing these inquiries, they actually give the opportunity to women who are kind of anthropologists in Africa, kind of social worker, like all these people who are not professionals, all of a sudden they have a place to send their reports. So in many ways, these leagues inquiries gave some legitimacy and to support to women who were doing good anthropological work and all that, who actually published in their bulletin, sent statistics to them, and made a name for themselves because they were associated with these children inquiries. So in that kind of indirect way, I see there's a whole paper about anthropology, these semi-anthropology women who actually do all sorts of interesting things because they're asked to do send material for these leagues inquiry. But I have to think about the mother bit. It's not obvious, my answer to that. But they are mothers of the world and all that. I mean, there's this kind of feminist that under all of that. But when they sit there, they don't speak much about mothers.
It's just really a question of how very much these, like, you talk about these aristocracy people. Anyways, women do, and very often, I found in what I looked at, you kind of find that connection that they're trying to get to other women that are not like them through very much the education of their children, through involvement in their children's lives.
Yep.
And so I've looked at the scouts in colonial, and so very much it's the education of children to be sent home to the mothers, right? So I was wondering if that was a trend you could see.
Well, one of the things I like, I've discovered, which is very interesting, kind of on the side, it's not answering your question straight, is that the people who pay for the Red Crosses in the Congo and all that, in the Gold Coast, the people with whom these people are corresponding when they do their funny inquiries in Africa, are often rich, indigenous black people, not white people. And there are good articles that say that what paid for the Ethiopian Red Cross, the Gold Coast Red Cross, was mainly local bourgeois black people, not white people. And we have decided that it's all white finance, but and then there's the training of nurses and all this, and loads of middle class black people involved in Africa. I know that part better. Support from, I mean, you've got so many bizarre things. When the Save the Children is feeding people in Russia, actually is feeding tons of them during the revolution. There's Hoover money, Save the Children money, Red Cross money, and the League accompanies that stuff. There's Refugee, Nansen, all sorts of people. They feed children because they raise money for children, not for the parents. So they have these long tables and they stop the parents. You cannot come if you're a parent. It's only the kids. And it's the same in Austria. They actually block so the kids go. And then the kids put stuff in their pocket. Yeah, they go out and they feed their family. But they exclude parents because they raise money for children, not for the parents. But you know, Jane Lewis, she wrote a lot about this, that if mothers were excluded, and really it's mothers that, you know, she thinks that you should, because you can raise attention for kids and infant mortality, but it's harder for mothers, and very often it should be going to mothers, but it's harder to bring the public support for mothers than for kids, and so often it goes to some misleading medical stuff.
Adopting a Declaration of Rights of Children implies the adhesion to a specific definition of childhood. Have you seen some clashes in it, or is it simplicity kind of a way to avoid these clashes?
Oh no, there's a lot of clashes on this. So initially, that simple one there, it's like it's a declaration. It's really good feelings. Nobody really bother about at what age, whatever. That it's quite a lot of good feelings pouring together. But when you get to 59, when the UN, you've got the creation of the UN, you've got the Charter of Human Rights, and then after that, you've got the Committee of Human Rights with our very own John Humphrey, Canadian guy there. The only topic on which East and West can agree after 48 is children. They can't do anything until the early 60s. So children, the convention, the Declaration of the Right of the Child of 59 is the only thing they can do together, East and West, because the economic and political rights, they don't agree. But they argue on things, abortion, they argue on when does child begin, right? And the Catholics are all there saying, you know, a child begins way early. They argue on when does child end, and they argue on this. You know, it's the invention of adolescence is not very far in 1919, but it's because it's such a declaration of good intention. When does it end? They don't really ask, right? But in 59, they really start asking, and then in 89, what's a child is written, 18 years old. It's really written there, but it's not written before 1989. But these are arguments that are important, and then you have this all. a bit related to what you're saying, there's an inquiry about that, the age of consent. Actually, that committee works on the age of consent. It's the part of it on the traffic of women and children, that when can you marry? When do you need and they do a big inquiry on the age of consent, the traffic of women and children. So I've not talked about these guys, but them with at what age can you marry is a kind of discussion about childhood and adulthood. Child labor, International Labor Office, when can you start working? But it's not when does a child finish and end that, it's more. And then there's the right to play, all these things, how far should you have a childhood? But these are more fancy arguments because they don't mean much until you have a convention. And in 59 they mean much because of abortion, because of the Catholics and abortion.
Thank you. Now Dominique's told me that she's able to stay after if we're gonna have a drink or a coffee or something, so please join us for that and continue the conversation, but we'll wind down the more formal part of the evening. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you very much, Dominique. Thank you. Our videographer tonight.